I left the DA's office in 1978, and David asked me to come practice with him, and I did. And about the first week there, he says, I want you to sit with me on a family custody case where we have the mother. And I had never been in a family court, so I sat second chair. The father got on the stand and started talking about how instrumental he was in his son's baseball teams. He had 2 teenage sons. And he went on and on and on, and they passed the witness to David, and David said, what's the name of the team? And the father said, what do you mean? The name of the team that your sons play on, what's the name of it? And the guy actually froze, did not know the name of the team, was lying about all that activity, and David passed the witness back to the other side. I never saw a person destroyed with one question. The jury was out 5 minutes, gave us the children. I sat back in my chair, you know, if this is all there is to family law, it's nothing to it. And I'm going to tell you one thing, I've sincerely regretted making that statement, but it was my first involvement. 2 weeks later, comes into the office, says, well, we got hired on a marijuana case. I said, well, why do we need 2 lawyers? He said, well, there's 28 tons. And at that time, it was the largest smuggling marijuana case in the history of Texas. This was 1979. It was down in Beaumont in the Eastern District before Judge Fisher, who was the presiding judge, federal presiding judge. Had about 12 defendants. All the big name criminal defense lawyers were there. The chemist got on the stand, testified about a sample of the marijuana he took, and when he got through with his testimony, Judge Fisher says, you may step down. David gets up and says, Judge, I would like to cross-examine. And I don't know if you know Joe Fisher, but it looks like John Wayne, one of these John Wayne judges. And he said, Mr. Gibson, are you telling me, are you disputing the fact that this is not marijuana? He said, no, sir, I would just like to have the right to confront this witness and to represent my client. He said, denied. And David slipped me a note and said, reversible error, failed to cross-examine. So we had built-in reversible error. That night, the law clerks got with Judge Fisher, got him straight on the law. The next morning, the first witness on the witness stand was the chemist, and Judge Fisher looks down and says, Mr. Gibson, do you have any questions? And so we questioned. David knew what the law was and knew he had him in a bind. And the other case was a breach of contract suit against Baker Botts, where a man was collecting on the insurance of his homeowners, and they accused him of being arson. And the only expert that Baker Botts had was the fire marshal. And David says, well, they can't use him. And I said, what do you mean? He says, the statute says that the fire marshal, being a public official, cannot testify in a private lawsuit. And that was the only expert Baker Botts had. And so when they called him, David stood up to exclude his testimony. And the judge says, I think you're right, Mr. Gibson. And they said, Judge, it was about 3:30 in the afternoon, they said, Judge, give us till tomorrow to see if we can come up with some law. And I'd be darned if they didn't come in the morning with an exception. They got that testimony in. But David had him on the ropes for about 16 hours, and I think he really enjoyed that. And then we asked him later, how did you do that? And they said, we put our 4 best lawyers on that issue all night long, and they found something. Now, those are 3 jurisdictions, and I wanted to remind everybody that David was certified in 3 specialties of criminal, family, and civil trial. Now, I don't know how many other people have had that distinction, but he did. And one thing about David, when he saw an injustice, he represented you. He represented the people in the pinstripes and also the overalls. David would walk in with a laborer one day, the next day president of a company, because he wouldn't allow an injustice to happen. I think of all the lawyers that I've seen throughout the years, I don't know any better than David Gibson when you combined intelligence, presentation, and style. And he had all that. And I know the 2.5 years that I was with him helped me tremendously professionally, but also on a personal level. He had the highest integrity. His word was his bond. Just a great guy to know, and I want to thank Laura for giving me the opportunity to say a few words this morning.